Good evening. I'm Karen Leewell. I'm here representing a number of groups and here to introduce Lisa. Anne Frywell got this idea in the back with the Sustainability Task Force of Verona to partner with the Sugar River Gardeners and the Sustain Verona group to teach residents about pollinator gardens and moving a bit beyond the no-mow May into the gardening season. So I'm here representing Sugar River Gardeners. We've been around for 30 years, and we have information on the table here and a sign-up sheet if you would like more information about our garden club and the programs that we have is this sheet here. Alongside the refreshments that we want you to partake in and not let us take it back home. Okay. And then also Sustain Verona is your local environmental group working on the solar panel project for the high school and clean energy. We also advocate green space preservation and also farmland preservation, renewable energy, and pollinator gardens, and just that's a brochure for that. Okay, so that's two groups, and then now we have Lisa Johnson, the expert. Also, just I wanted to tell you that we have a pollinator garden at Hometown Junction. Sugar River Gardeners does. And so that's a good example of something that you could replicate in your own yard. We're saying that you don't have to have a really large space, but you can have a small pollinator garden. And so visit that by the bike path and the Hometown Junction shelters across the parking lot from there. And we also have our Edible Gardens project that you can freely pick vegetables in that garden space, Central Park, and at Harriet Park. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Lisa Johnson is a Dane County Extension horticulture educator. She has a bachelor's degree in horticulture from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree in life science communication. Prior to that, she spent 8 years working in the horticulture industry in landscaping and at various greenhouses and nurseries in Dane County. She's been the Dane County Extension horticulture educator since 2004. Among her responsibilities are providing continuing education for the public and members of the green industry, overseeing management of the Dane County Extension Teaching Garden, working with the Supporting Healthy Black Agriculture Project through the nonprofit Urban Triage, and acting as staff for the Dane County Tree Board. She has a weekly column in the Wisconsin State Journal, holds the online Green Thumb Gardening Class series in fall and winter, and gives frequent presentations to garden clubs and libraries in southern Wisconsin. She's also a regular guest on Larry Mueller's Garden Talk program on Wisconsin Public Radio. Please welcome her.
All right. Is everybody able to hear me okay? Yes. Okay, I'll try not to stray too far from the mouthpiece because I know it doesn't carry very far. All right, well, thank you all for coming out on a perfectly good spring evening when you might be taking a walk or enjoying the outdoors. Appreciate you coming to learn about butterflies in particular, but also pollinators in general. When we first started discussing what we wanted me to talk about tonight, we did talk about pollinators in general, but ended up kind of narrowing it down to butterflies and moths in particular. So a lot of what I'm saying tonight will actually apply to pollinators as well as butterflies, because butterflies are pollinators after all. But that's the species, butterflies and moths, that I'm going to be speaking about most tonight. So here's how the presentation is laid out, and I'm going to attempt to do this in about 50 minutes. We are going to start out talking about insects in general and why it is so important to preserve them. We'll talk about how butterflies and moths evolved, and just a little bit on butterfly physiology, so if I mention a particular body part, you know what I'm talking about. We'll talk about where to find information on Wisconsin butterflies in particular, and then we'll go into how to plan a butterfly garden and the features that you should include. And then we'll get to the really fun part where we start to talk about plants. And to do that, we need to talk about both natives and nativars, because you will find both in the commerce. And then I'll go into a few plants in particular. Lots of times trees and shrubs are overlooked, but in many cases they are super important to our pollinators, butterflies and moths included. And we'll finish up by talking about perennials, herbs, and then I'll give you a whole bunch of resources. And I will make these slides available to the library so that you can review them later if you're interested. Also, if you're interested, I do have access to a rather large document that it's an Excel file, but it has different butterflies and moths and the plants that they particularly like or maybe need in the case of the caterpillars. All right, and so I can get you that if you're interested in it. All right, so let's move on here. We are unfortunately in a biodiversity crisis, and the butterflies show that decline the same as our bees and so on. So monarchs in particular, because they're so charismatic, people tend to track them a little bit more. And due to things like habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, pesticide use, diseases and pests, and poor quality forage, we have lost a lot of butterflies. And that includes other species besides just monarchs. Monarchs are particularly vulnerable because they are migrants and they have to all go back to one area to overwinter. So they are very vulnerable to storms along the way, storms at the site, logging, etc. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. In this same amount of time, the last 20 years, the rusty patch bumblebee, which you may have heard of, which was once very common in 28 states, has dropped by 87%. So again, it's not just the butterflies, it's insects as a group. Now, part of the reason for that is that poor quality forage, because many caterpillars, and I will say that this applies to about 30% of our bee species as well, are specialist feeders with moths and butterflies. They're specialist feeders in the caterpillar stage, and with our bees, they can be specialist feeders before the bee hatches, when it's still being fed by the workers. There are bees that only can have a certain type of pollen, maybe from a couple different types of plants in the same family, maybe just one type of plant altogether. So it's really important to think about the caterpillar stage with our butterflies and moths, as well as the bees, thinking about the larval stage for those. So examples of specialist feeders, obviously we all know about, monarchs and milkweeds, but also the Carter blue butterfly, which is endangered in Wisconsin. Its larvae can only feed on wild lupin, which only is a couple of places in the state. We have pipevine swallowtails and, pipevine. Red admirals need nettles, which are not a very popular plant with many of us since they're rather well-armed and painful if you back into them. And then black swallowtails can only, their caterpillars can only feed on things that are in the Apiaceae family, which is the carrot family. Now, most butterflies that are butterfly adults and moth adults can nectar or feed on many different kinds of flowers, but it's the caterpillar stage that may only be able to survive on one different type of plant or a restricted number of plants. Okay, so they've been around for a long time. We have moths starting at about 190 million years ago, where they found scales from moth wings in fossils. Butterflies are a much more recent arrival at 56 million years old. And so we have many more moths than we do butterflies. For every butterfly, there are about 19 species of moths. Now, moths don't get the attention that they deserve. They're really good pollinators, actually better than butterflies, but because they're night-flying insects, we don't see them doing their work. And what we don't see, we tend to discount because we don't know that it's happening. But fortunately, we do have a lot of moth researchers now that are being able to show us those things. So the interesting thing is that butterflies are actually moths. They simply evolved to become day-flying insects. And because they're day-flying, they often are more colorful than moths, but not all the time. There are some absolutely gorgeous colored moths as well. And as I mentioned, we have lots more moth species than butterflies. This one, which is the dot-lined white moth, I thought that I would show you a picture of it in its caterpillar stage. It's sitting there on top of a twig. You could hardly even tell that it's there. Some of these creatures have amazing camouflage. So when we talk about butterflies, the parts that I'll probably talk about the most are wings, antennae, and the proboscis, which is what they feed with. They also have amazing scent and taste glands in their feet. And in the case of females, they're ovipositors. Their ovipositors will actually taste a plant to make darn sure that they're putting their egg on the type of plant that the caterpillar needs. And they can be very fussy. I watched a monarch once that was ovipositing on a milkweed. And she flew around from one leaf to the other to one leaf, and I was like, oh my gosh, make a decision already. And then she finally decided, okay, this is just the right spot. And I thought, whew, no wonder there aren't very many of you. So we do have then these 4 life stages for butterflies and moths, and a butterfly garden, in order to really, truly support these insects, needs to support all the different life stages. So lots of times we don't think about the caterpillar or the egg stage, but the other thing that we don't think about is how these creatures overwinter. Some of them are overwintering in the chrysalis form. Some of them may overwinter as adults with wings. Some of them may overwinter as caterpillars or in the egg stage. So depending on how they overwinter, they may be in different places than we are expecting to find them in our yards. So I suggest, if you're planning a butterfly garden or a pollinator garden in general, to find out more about the species that live in our area so that you can properly support them. In the cases of moths and butterflies, we need to know what they prefer as far as nectar plants, that's what the adults feed on, and larval plants for the caterpillars. And then also learn about how they overwinter so you can make habitat for that as well. For any pollinator, including bees, beetles, whatnot, you should have something blooming from April to October. So think not only then about the plant species that we need to support larvae and adults, but also think about flower shapes and colors and the timing. Butterflies and moths in general like to have a flower that has a good landing surface and perching surface for feeding, although there are some that have really long tongues that will specialize on flowers that are pendant and have, you know, a long corolla, just like a hummingbird would feed. So as I mentioned, the butterflies are only going to lay eggs where the emerging caterpillars will have a good food source. So that means that we need these particular plants. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about some of the butterfly species in our area, or rather where to find information about them. I did include this one. This is the only carnivorous butterfly in North America. The caterpillars actually will feed only on woolly aphids. So they don't actually feed on plant material, but they feed on material that is being eaten by woolly aphids. And the adults will also feed on aphid honeydew, which is what they excrete when they suck the sap out of plants. And the adults also feed on carrion as well. So this is the primary place that I recommend going for information on Wisconsin butterflies. The Wisconsin Butterfly Site or organization is part of the Southern Wisconsin Butterfly Association, known as SWIBA, and they are a local branch of a larger North American organization. And that SWIBA group, they hold field trips, they have speakers that come in, they do butterfly counts, and they have all kinds of really cool information on the website. Here's what you might find. So they have great pictures of male and female butterflies. They also will have information about when you might most often see them during the year, what their identifying characteristics are, where you find them in the state, what they feed on, and all kinds of great information. This was only it was all I could fit on the slide, let's put it that way. There's more information. But they have that on all of the butterfly species that are in Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, we have about 155 species, 118 of which are permanent residents, and then we have migrants, of which, of course, the monarch is one. And then we occasionally get some that are blown here in storms. That's not uncommon, where you find a butterfly that's way out of its range, and that's how it got here, was on storm winds. Now, at the same time, our moth species are over 1,000. So 1,000 is compared to 155. But of course, to see them, many of them, you have to go out at night with a flashlight. So that's why we don't have as many mothers as we do butterfliers. I thought I would just briefly talk about the life cycle of monarch butterflies. The last generation of the season, and there are a couple different generations that are going to be in Wisconsin over the growing season. That last one that's in September is the one that migrates. And the rest of them in between stay here and complete their life cycle on milkweeds. But at the end of the season, the super generation migrates thousands of miles to overwinter in Mexico. And you can see where the blue spots are on the map. There's the biggest population in Mexico. There's a smaller population in Florida, and then smaller one also on the California coast. If you're interested in monarchs in particular, Monarch Joint Venture is a really good local organization that you might look at, and Monarch Watch is another good one as well. And they track where the butterflies are and, you know, population statistics and so on. So if you happen to be in the right place in Mexico, in the mountain areas on south-facing slopes, at about 10,000 feet above sea level, you see how specific this is, on these particular fir trees, then you might see scenes like that of butterflies overwintering there. So when we have a storm like we did in 2017 that knocked down about 100 acres of trees, it killed over 6 million butterflies that were overwintering there. And it was a bad year, for sure. We also have problems there with illegal logging, and of course climate change is becoming an issue as well. I also wanted to talk about Karner blues, because you've probably heard about those. They're actually quite tiny, only about an inch. Usually when you see pictures of them like this, they look like they're really big, and then people are surprised when but it's a little bitty guy. So it usually has 2 generations a year, and the caterpillars hatch in April from eggs. So the eggs were laid the previous year, and they're usually laid on the old stalks of the wild lupin plant. And you can see that populations of wild lupin in the state are, well, they're widely scattered. They only grow on sandy soils, so they're in the central sands area and, you know, along the river and, you know, a couple of other places that are even smaller that are not on the map. But you also will find them in parts of other Midwestern states. But again, that lupin is absolutely critical for their population. All right, so let's move into planning a butterfly garden. You want to have a sunny location, and I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail. Overwintering sites, rocks for basking, areas for puddling, a water source, and those are all the water source and rocks are great for other pollinators as well. Shelter areas, and then the all-important reducing or eliminating pesticide use. And I just want to say this is our pollinator garden at the Teaching Garden. I do invite everybody to visit us during the growing season. Our Teaching Garden has 12 different garden areas. Besides the pollinator garden, there's also a prairie garden, a shade garden where we have a lot of Wisconsin wildflowers, and we have a prairie garden and edibles garden, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd love to have you come. We're on the east side of Madison. It's a bit of a trek from here, I know, but it's totally worth it, if I do say so. You can give yourself a virtual tour also by visiting the Dane County Extension website and going to the horticulture tab where there's more information about each of the 12 different garden areas and the species in each garden area. All right, the reason that we cite butterfly gardens in sun is because being insects and cold-blooded, butterflies need sunlight to warm their flight muscles. That's a lot of wing space, you know, that's got to be warmed up, so their flight muscles are important to do that with, and so they need sunlight for that. And of course, they want a variety of plants. We've already talked about needing them April through October. We do want most of the plants to be natives, but up to 30% in your garden can be non-native. Because I know most of us don't want to give up all of our non-native plants, but certainly natives are best for supporting our insects. One thing to remember is that larval host plants are there to be eaten. Dr. Doug Tallamy, who you've probably heard that name, he's very well known in the native plant community, and he tells a story about a lady that planted milkweed because she wanted to support the monarch butterflies. And she told him, well, there were all these worms on them that were eating the plants, so I squished them. And yeah, very sad story. It's like, yeah, they do have that larval stage. So if you see holes in your leaves, this is a good thing. I've spent most of my career recommending plants that didn't get eaten, and now I recommend plants that do, because, well, we need to support our insects. So do your diligence, do your research, find out what kinds of plants your butterflies need. And the overwintering sites, this is going to be unpopular, what I'm about to say. But first of all, I'll talk just a little bit about it. So when they're overwintering, whether they're an adult or a caterpillar or whatever, they go into this hibernation kind of stage called diapause. And their bodies are triggered during the fall when the days get shorter to produce some sugar alcohols that are kind of like antifreeze. So glycogen is probably one of the biggest ones, and other cryo protector sugars like sorbitol and trehalose. Those all will help to lower the freezing point of their hemolymph, which is their version of blood. And so when the freezing point is lowered, they're able to survive the winter temperatures. Now, again, some of them are going to migrate south, like the monarch, but many species overwinter in our gardens in leaf litter or garden litter. And it can be anything from in bark crevices, under logs, the dead plant material, seed pods, plant stems, and many different things. So here's the unpopular part. Ideally, you would not remove dead perennial stems from the garden. Now, this time of year, actually starting at about the middle of March, if we don't have snow, cutting those stems back to between 8 and 18 inches, and I would leave a variety of heights. We have 30% of our bees that are stem nesting bees, and they need open stems that they can go into. So the perennial stems that are hollow are the ones that are really good for that. And so if you cut them back to that height, you should be able to, between, I know it says 18 and 24, but there are some that will take shorter stems as well. So 8 to 24 inches. They should be left in the garden. And I know we all want to clean up our gardens. I have spent many years being absolutely ruthless about that. And once I found out that I should not do that, I've now stopped doing that. And what happens is that, yes, the stems may look untidy in spring, but they soon will be covered up by the new growth, and eventually they will fall over and disintegrate. And now when you have non-native plants, you don't necessarily have to do that unless they've got really nice open hollow stems. So if you don't want all of your garden to look like that, that's fine. Just be sure and leave some areas that are rough so that our insects can overwinter there. And another thing, instead of breaking up all the leaves, is that fireflies, for example, need 2 years in leaf litter to complete their life cycle. Some of our bees, again, that are stem nesting also need a good couple of years to complete their life cycle. That's why you shouldn't take the stems away, because they may need 2 years. All right, rocks for basking. Again, it provides heat. You may see butterflies slowly opening and closing their wings. That's the basking behavior where they're warming up their flight muscles. And if you don't have rocks, but you have a deck, that's awesome. That'll work too. Puddling, this is a behavior particularly males do because they need extra salts and amino acids for reproduction. So you often will see them in muddy places like next to stream banks out in the wild where they are using their feet and proboscis to absorb these minerals. Now, some people like to put out fruit. I think that's fine, but in July through September, there are things like yellow jackets that also will like fruit a whole lot. So I probably wouldn't have that stuff out at that time of year. But you can easily make, a little puddling dish there. You have some sand and some mud in there, as long as you tip it every once in a while if it collects a lot of water, but that should be fine. And just wet rock, they can actually absorb a lot out of that. So here's an example in our pollinator garden. We have a little solar water fountain. Of course, it doesn't run when it's cloudy outside, but it has a very gentle stream. You can see it keeps the rocks wet enough that we have algae growth, and it's a good place for butterflies to do their puddling thing, and also other pollinators can have a drink there as well. There are other ways to do that too, as long as you don't have your water too deep, because you don't want your butterflies to drown while they're attempting to get some water. Ideally, you would not use insecticides at all. I had somebody contact me, he's got grubs in his lawn and a pretty bad case. And I hate to recommend insecticides. That's a conundrum when you have a problem like that. What I'd like to do is encourage him to get rid of some of the lawn and make it into a pollinator garden. We all should do that. We all should get rid of some of our lawn, which is an ecological deadscape, and put in some pollinator gardens to help our insects. And particularly we want to stay away from neonicotinoid chemicals because they have a whole lot of sublethal effects as well on different insects and even birds and fish. All right, getting into the plants. My colleagues upstairs in the Dane County Extension, or the building where we are housed, the Parks Department has some people that do a lot with different kinds of native plants. So they have a program that's called Plant Dane, and it's a cost share program if you're working with a school or a church or something, and you're trying to get low-cost native plants. They have a cost share program to do that. Again, native plants are going to be best for supporting caterpillars, but there are non-native nectar plants that can work for the adults. So you can find at their site information on designing butterfly gardens. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a second. I hate to pound this in again, but mostly native perennials, trees, and shrubs are best. Some herbs can work really well, though. There are some things like the swallowtails that can have their caterpillars develop on parsley, for example. So the Plant Dane website has some pre-made butterfly garden designs if you're interested in that. And I also give workshops on pollinator garden designs if you're interested in that. If you have like a nonprofit group or a church group that wants to do that activity, let me know and I would be happy to set that up. You can also find other resources. This is one that I designed that is on our UW horticulture website. I got it set up so the plants that the names are in yellow need mostly sun, the ones that are in blue will take more shade, and then it's set up, I give you the height of the plant and you can find out what time of year it flowers, And you can also look at it and get a rough idea of what color the blooms are. But there are, other resources like that out there. Okay, I've been blabbing on about natives, so I better define exactly what I mean by that. So a native plant is a species that's been in the wild in a particular place for thousands of years. It's very well adapted to where it has evolved. And of course, the native moths and butterflies will have evolved to be able to feed on and reproduce on those plants. These plants are well adapted for our climate and typically don't need a whole lot of extra irrigation or fertilizing or anything like that once they are established. And typically they have a huge range. This is a woody plant. This is our red bud. Red bud is a plant here that is a forest edge plant. It's a legume. And you can see that it has this enormous range. However, with woody plants, you do have to be a little careful because a plant that has its seed source in Texas is not going to survive our Wisconsin winters. Likewise, a seed source from Canada is probably going to have a great deal of difficulty surviving in Florida, for example. And that's because over this huge range, they have evolved to deal with the climate. So our redbud leaves are thinner and bigger because they're under shade. The ones that are in Texas and so on, the leaves are smaller and they've developed a really thick epidermal coat to help keep them from drying out. So even though it's the same species, they've evolved to deal with the climate. And you can find plants that are state natives, Midwest natives, US natives, North American natives. So it's a very slippery term when you go to the garden center and they say, oh, it's a native plant. Well, great, but is it native to Missouri or is it native to Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and so on? So it's a good thing to find out exactly what that means. Now, it may not make a whole lot of difference to you except for the hardiness issue, whether you're planting something that is, from the East Coast, the Northeast Coast, perfectly hardy here, but has maybe slightly different genetics. That may not matter to you if you're just doing a garden planting, but if you are doing a faithful restoration of plants that were here before settlement, then you probably want to be a lot more choosy. And some people say your seed source should be within 50 miles, and that can be difficult to find, although it's getting easier. Now, you may hear the term nativar. What that is a play on the word cultivar, and a cultivar is a cultivated variety. So it's a selection that we have made, and nativars are selections of native plants. And they've often been selected for different characteristics that are really exciting to us, like good fall color, or bigger flowers, or more fruit, or something like that. And the selection process, it can be a mutation that occurs naturally. It could be that we saw a couple of different plants that we liked their characteristics, and they're the same species, but we bred them together to see if we could bring both of those characteristics into one. So, there are different ways that those nativars can come up. This is an example of a nativar that is of our native musclewood, and Mike Yanni up at Johnson's Nursery in Menominee Falls bred this one. I have this one in my yard. We have it in the teaching garden. I don't have enough space at home to have a full-sized musclewood, but I wanted one because it's a larval host for the eastern tiger swallowtail, and it has awesome fall color. So I did buy a nativar in that case. So what's so bad about nativars? Not necessarily anything. If you do, the one thing Doug Tallamy found was that if you take a normally green-leaved plant and make it purple-leaved, that changes the nutrition value of the plant, and often the caterpillars can't eat it. But in general, if it's just shorter or it's got better fall color or what have you, it's generally going to be okay for the lepidopterans, the moths and butterflies. However, it does mean that the genetic pool is very limited because these are not produced by seed in general. In general, they are going to be asexually produced by cuttings or tissue culture or something. So there's just some concern that that may pollute the local gene pool. So, if you live next to the arboretum, maybe you don't want a whole lot of nativars in your yard. All right, moving into trees. So in Wisconsin, actually, willows are maybe even better than oaks, but in general, oaks top a lot of lists for larval food. And they support just an incredible number of lepidopteran species. So these are all different species of moths and butterflies that are supported by these different species of trees. And you can go to this website, which is at the National Wildlife Foundation, and you can type in your zip code and it will find for you the plants that support the most amount of caterpillars that are native to your area. So that's a really super nice tool. The ones that support the most caterpillars are called keystone species. If you think of a Roman arch, the keystone is that stone in the middle. If you remove that, the rest of the arch collapses. So keystone species are critical for maintaining the ecological food web. We have lots of native oaks. We have white oak, we have bur oak, we have red oak, we have black oak, and many others. This is a picture of bur oak at our teaching garden, and we have it surrounded by a developing oak savanna, so we're very excited about that. But there are some of these native to Wisconsin or the Midwest or other areas in the US. If you're looking for a shorter one, I think it's Prinoides. I'd have to look that up to be sure, but there are some shorter species that are out there. And they're generally wind pollinated, but they do produce pollen very early in the season, and they sometimes will even produce nectar very early in the season. Some maples do this to attract the bees that are out very early. And that pollen source can be very important to those early season bees and lepidopterans. This is another great one. The serviceberry, there are a few different species, but this one is native to Wisconsin in the Midwest, and it supports over 100 different lepidopterans. It's a 4-species star. Early season, probably in a week or two, you'll start to see the buds on it. It starts flowering usually like the second week in April. Excellent fall color. It gets wonderful fruits that are really quite tasty if you can get to them before the birds do. They'll look like ripe blueberries when they're ripe. And then it has this beautiful smooth silvery bark that looks awesome during the fall and winter. Pagoda dogwood, another native. This is a partial shade species, so it's under canopy of other trees. It needs average to moist soils. The more shade it gets, the more spready it is, and the more straight the branches are going to grow. They look awesome with snow on them. This one is also I would say a 4-season star, because it looks great during the winter, but also has flowers in the spring that are attractive, and it also has fruits for birds, and it often will get kind of a wine red fall color, and supports over 100 other lepidopterans. One problem it does occasionally have is a disease called golden canker. Unfortunately, there's no cure for it except for cutting off the affected branch. Lindens. Lindens have wonderful smelling flowers, and they are good-sized trees, but they are a magnet for pollinators of all kinds, including butterflies and moths, and supports over 150 species, so good. And of course, there are many more that I'm able to cover here in the short time we have available. Chokeberry, black chokeberry, there's also a red chokeberry. This one, you'll probably find more nativars than the straight species. But great fall color, fruits, and also great flowers. Buttonbush, this one is a variety called Sputnik, guess why? This is a larval host for 18 species, and small bees and small butterflies really love the flowers. There are some nativars that are shorter, and that the leftover flower heads on Crimson Comet and Magical Moonlight will turn red. Magical Moonlight also has good fall color. Pussy willows. I spent years not recommending this because it's kind of gangly and it grows fast and gets eaten by caterpillars. Well, yes, it gets eaten by caterpillars. Yay! So, very important pollen producer early in the spring, and you do need to prune it if you want to keep it from running amok, but it is an excellent willow that you can use. This one is a much more restrained species, quite a bit shorter, sweet pepperbush or clethra. The flowers smell like vanilla and they bloom in July. It's great fall color. And it doesn't support a ton of different lepidopterans, but enough that I think it's worthwhile, and also it's very popular with bees as well. And it's short, so if you need short, this is a good one for you. It stays pretty tidy looking, but it does need decent moisture. Won't grow in hot, dry sites. Wild plum is another one that does sucker and does need to be kept up with, but it is very popular with different types of caterpillars, and over 340 different lepidopterans. You can, if you're into making jams and jellies, make that with the fruits. And of course, it has wonderful flowers in the spring. All right, just a few of our perennial plants. I couldn't get through this talk without recommending a milkweed, right? So here's one. This is swamp milkweed. If you have heavy clay soil, this is the milkweed for you. It is fairly short-lived though, so make sure that the seeds get scattered on the site. It is a bit taller than some. And there are some nativars, but they look fairly similar, except for the white one to this. The other less aggressive milkweed that I tend to recommend is butterfly flower. It does need good drainage, so not for heavy clay, but average soils it usually will do okay with. Much shorter than most, long bloom period, beautiful color, and quite prolific producer of seeds. Not that it is, a spreader by seeds very much, but it still does produce them. We have a native hyssop that is, I think it's the same species here. Yeah, it's the same species. This particular one is a yellow, a golden colored foliage, but you could use the straight species as well. It blooms a long time, a couple of months here. Great nectar plant for bees as well as butterflies. our native lead plant. This one has silvery foliage. It's kind of a woody plant. And so it does look like kind of a shrub during the winter. It's not for wet soils, but if you need something to plant in your hell strip between the sidewalk and the street, this is a good candidate for that. And a number of caterpillars like it, as well as bees. This is a non-native, but the bees like it so much, and some of the butterflies that I included it. Very tiny flowers, but it blooms from June to October. That's ridiculous. And it likes dry to medium soils. Really a pretty carefree plant, and the pollinators just love it a lot. This is our native coneflower. Purple coneflower is actually native a bit south of here. It blooms from June to early August, and yeah, purple is fine too, but if you wanted the straight native, this is it. Joe Pieweed, if you get the straight native, it will be very, very tall. So I usually recommend one of the shorter ones because most of us don't have space for a 6 foot, 8 foot tall perennial that flops over. But those are some nativars you might want to try. We have, I believe, 12, 14 species of liatris that are native here, and the butterflies love them all. They do need good drainage, and if you have a lot of rabbits, you may need to protect them. Monarda, or bee balm, another very popular mint family plant. You're going to find mostly nativars for this, but you can find the straight species if you want it. They're really good garden plants, but they do spread, so it's something to watch. Early season, Virginia bluebells, a lot of the bees and butterflies with longer tongues, as well as some of the hummingbirds, if they happen to be around, which they're usually not, but they could eat that. This is a non-native, but it blooms pretty early and is in the mint family and is a good nectar source for a number of our lepidopterans. It's also very drought tolerant. Mid-season, or late season garden phlox, and there is a variety called Gina, which is very popular with butterflies. I mean, I've just seen them covered with butterflies, so great plant for the garden. Aromatic aster, or any of our native asters, are fine. They're great late season suppliers of pollen and nectar, and there are some species that need it as a larval host. I know everybody's going, oh, goldenrod. Well, don't worry. There are some well-behaved goldenrod species. They're not all like the nasty Canada goldenrod that's so aggressive. If you want to know more about them, check out Mount Cuba and go to their website, and they have trials for goldenrods, and you can compare and contrast which ones are best for attracting pollinators. And you can see they also attract a lot of lepidopterans. Herbs, not going to go through all of those, but any of those are great as nectar sources, and some like dill and parsley and fennel can host swallowtails. Okay, couple of resources here. If you're not familiar with Doug Tallamy, just Google him, and you'll find all kinds of really entertaining videos. He's very engaging as a speaker, but he's also written some amazing books. I particularly recommend Nature's Best Hope. Yeah, Doug is awesome. Jim McCormack has written a book called Gardening for Moths. He's also a very engaging speaker, and you can also find videos for him. And then we've got the web sources. So yeah, there's lots of them. A local guy wrote a book called Common Butterflies of Wisconsin with Native Hosted Nectar Plants. It's by Randy Powers. I think you can still find it. It's about $30 and definitely worth the price. So, I ran over my time a little bit. Are there any questions? Yes?
If we live in an area where we have, like say a 1/4 acre lot, and we're surrounded by people who are using lawn chemicals
Oh, I'm sorry.
and fertilizer,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily pesticides, but I think it's probably still harmful to a lot of the pollinators. Is there anything we can do to try to protect our property from drift and anything else?
Yeah, so the question was, she has a 1/4 acre property that is surrounded by people who do traditional horticulture and use a lot of fertilizers and you said pesticides as well?
I don't know if they're using pesticides, but herbicides.
Yeah, herbicides. There's not a ton that you can do about it other than if you're planting natives, I would put up signage and, explain what this is about. Try and get them interested and engaged. Maybe put up a little library with information about natural landscaping and why it's important not to use pesticides and so on. If you think your neighborhood group would be into having speakers, there are all kinds of speakers around here. Susan Carpenter, I can give talks to that can, come in and talk to groups if you think they might be open to it. I'm a big proponent of the carrot rather than the stick. Sometimes people, they just don't realize the harm that they're doing, and they need to just become familiar with the concept. So I would do that. I would also try and make sure that your property looks as awesome as it possibly can, so that because native plants are tall, they've done these studies and people tend to think that tall plants are weeds, and it's hard to break us out of that. So repeating different species so that it looks like it's designed can sometimes help people get better integrated with that idea. I can give you information about the study if you'd like to see how to draw people in.
I do let the dandelions grow because I like dandelions and I know they're food for a lot of creatures. And I did put a sign out about that last year, showing what it was. But I think that actually makes other people get more chemicals because they're so conditioned.
Well, you're providing a seed source,
The
unfortunately.
dandelion seed might blow into their water or something. So.
Yeah, that is problematic.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I feel for you. Are there any other questions? Yes.
I've always heard that crab apples as a subspecies of apples are not native. They're from Kazakhstan and were introduced in the United States in the 1800s.
There is at least one species that is native. I'm not coming up with it off the top of my head, but you're right, most of the crab apples that we have on the market are not native species.
And spread readily too.
Some of them can, yeah. But we do have a native crab apple. I'm just not remembering what it is at this very second. But if you're like growing apples for food, the flowers do provide nectar sources for early season pollinators. So there is something good about it. And also, as long as you don't have a lot of spread by bird, can provide bird food as well. So there are some good things about them too. But I take your point. Any other questions? Yes.
So if you live in an apartment with a balcony, so you can't have like the full garden,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of plant, if you can just have like one or two, would you prioritize?
Yeah, okay. What I would try and do is have like 3 different pots so that you can have spring blooming, summer blooming, and fall blooming. Species doesn't matter quite so much. I guess I would try and do something like asters in fall, liatris in summer, and then any one of the spring blooming, species would be fine. Is it mostly sun or shade on your balcony?
So,
Sun? Okay. Yeah, then prairie species would be great in spring. But yeah, you can make a difference even with a few pots of native plants. If not to the butterflies, then to the bees. So
What about mints, like in a setting like that?
yeah, mints would be good too, or something like parsley, because that can host the swallowtails. So you'd be surprised how quick they can find things like that.
Are there any grasses that have particular insect benefits?
So the question was, are there grasses that can have insect benefits? And yes, mostly though as nesting sites and as, overwintering sites if they're a grass species that has a hollow stem. But bumblebees do like to, and a few other bee species like to nest under grass tussocks. So they do recommend having some grasses in with the other plants in pollinator gardens. Yes?
Do you have any tips for areas that have high bunny activity?
So, yes, tips for areas that have lots of bunnies. That is definitely a tough one. There are some things they tend to not like plants that have a lot of aromatic to them, so like mints. And I don't recommend necessarily planting mints in the ground because they will become thugs, but potted plants. Of course, there is fencing. I know it's not very ornamental, but fencing is probably the best thing to do. You can also try, blood meal, which you have to reapply after it rains. Trying to remember if we have a publication on plants not preferred by deer, but I don't think we have one on rabbits. Yeah, there are, I believe on our teaching garden website, on the Pollinator garden, there is information on which one of those plants are not preferred by rabbits. So you might want to check that out. They don't tend to like milkweeds, I can tell you that. They have cardiac glycosides in them, so there are not a lot of animals that can feed on those.
I think calamine and millennium allium, they don't.
Oh, that's right, the alliums. Yeah, they don't like alliums.
The pollinator swarms are on there.
Yeah. Good one, Karen. I forgot about the alliums. Yes?
So the plants that the caterpillars eat, and you see the leaves disappearing. So do you basically sacrifice the plant? Or is there a way to allow the plant to regenerate, or how does that work?
So the question was if your pollinator plant or your caterpillar plant is getting eaten by caterpillars, are you going to lose the plant? I think that's what you were asking. First of all, I do recommend planting multiples if at all possible. But these plants have evolved to be eaten, so they usually will recover. Now, when it's a very young plant and isn't established, you might want to protect it the first year or two from caterpillars until it gets well established and is able to take care of itself. But most of the time, they're going to be just fine, and generally the caterpillars don't eat the whole thing. And if they eat it before, say, July, they can generally refoliate and not be too disturbed by it. I think there was a question here, and then I'll go in the back.
I've tried to start a little pollinator garden, and last year I got attacked by ground bees that seemed to have
Oh,
taken up residence.
you got pollinators.
So, yeah, so now I'm like, well, I don't want to kill them, but they're in an area where people walk by all the time and they can be dangerous. So I don't know if there's a way to like encourage them to move elsewhere or spirit them away, or if there's an extension resource, but I don't really, it's not a really good place to have a nest.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, I put in a pollinator garden and I got ground bees. Now, first of all, are you sure they're bees and not wasps?
I saw one, I mean, one came out and nailed my hand.
Okay,
And
They're probably a wasp.
I don't think it looked like a bee. I don't know what it was.
okay. Often they're going to actually be wasps. They look bee-like, but they tend to be much more aggressive. So if they are wasps, sometimes they don't reuse the same spot. So you can hope that that's the case. The paper wasps certainly don't, reuse the same nest. Unfortunately, most of these species are not able to be moved like honeybees can. So I'm hoping that those are wasps and not bees. Occasionally, you will find, bumblebees nesting in the ground. They like old rodent burrows or something like that. But usually, unless you step in it, they're not going to come after you.
I think maybe what I'll try to do is when it gets cold again, like below freezing, go up, I at least want to wear the cover away.
Yeah.
So I can see what it is, and
Yeah.
then move the cover to the other side of the garden.
Yeah, and if you want to take a picture and send it to me if there's any kind of material left in there that I might be able to identify. If I can't get it, I'll send it to our entomologist and see if they can figure it out.
Because I want to support pollinators.
Yes, that would be very sad. I'm not there. Yeah,
I don't want to get attacked by anything.
no, I wouldn't blame you.
A lot of commercial nurseries like Prairie Moon Nursery and Prairie Nursery and the Arboretum too have butterfly garden or pollinator garden sales where they'll sell you 25 or 50 little plants in a tray. What do you think of them?
So the question was that some of the commercial nurseries, they sell by seed as well as little plants, and often they will sell like a curated collection sometimes of flats of plants, like they may have a mix for a pollinator garden, or they may have a mix for a woodland garden, and so on. The ones that you've mentioned, Prairie Nursery, Prairie Moon, the Arboretum, I think those are all really good places to get plants. There are certainly a lot more. Locally, there's also Tend that's in Mount Horeb. There's Two Fern in Madison. There's Sprig in the Madison area. Gnarly Oak. So there's a bunch of them out there, and I think they are all selling at least the local ones I just mentioned are selling those small plugs. And we sell some of them too at our plant sale in the spring at the teaching garden. That's a little plug. The third Sunday in May, 11 to 2, I'd get there at 10:30 because we tend to sell out very quickly. Yes, I thought there was a movie. Yes.
So we've been spreading the milkweed pods and getting lots of plants growing, but never see anybody.
Yeah, the question was, we've been putting out milkweed and we're not seeing monarchs.
Or when I do see monarchs, I never see any little eggs.
You never see eggs or caterpillars. Yeah, I know that's frustrating. I would keep planting though. Even if you don't get the monarchs, there are other insects that are specialist feeders on milkweeds, and so at least you'd be supporting them. But patience, we didn't have caterpillars on our milkweeds for quite a number of years, and then one year they just suddenly started appearing, so it's worth the wait.
I think if you have other questions for Lisa, maybe you could ask her. We do have run out of time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank